everybody. This is Jess from 3D Learning Experts, and you're listening to the LD Experts Podcast, the show for busy parents who want to help their kids with learning disabilities, or as I like to say, learning differences, go from surviving to thriving. Hello, everybody. Today, our special guest is Polina Shkadron, who is a play-based therapist. She focuses on autism, ADHD, and mealtime. So we're definitely going to talk about how to help students with autism, ADHD, and maybe gain a little understanding of what the mealtime aspect is. And then Polina is going to share information about executive functioning skills, which I know is a huge concern for so many parents of neurodiverse children. Welcome, Polina.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we're able to meet today and talk about such important issues and how parents can help their kids.
Definitely.
So share with us what you do and definitely what the mealtime situation is.
Well, from the background, it sometimes sounds like I do a lot, and yet I'm very specialized because all of the skills that we work on are so intertwined. So when it comes to children who are experiencing challenges, like you said, with executive functioning, it's not that parents call and say, my child's having a hard time with executive functioning. The phone calls are, there's a behavior issue, there's an emotion piece, or somebody's pushing somebody else, they can't pay attention. And the more that I listen and the more that we have an in-depth conversation, all roads lead back to aspects of executive functioning, especially when it comes to regulation. So when children are having challenges with self-regulation, there's no way that they can have access to higher learning skills, and the expectations that they have in the classrooms are really way too high for them to reach in the moments when they're not available to learn, really.
So you're saying we need to address the executive functioning skills before we can expect them to perform better academically.
Definitely. It's all tied in, and executive functioning it's a culmination of sets of skills. So when children are not doing well, it's not because they don't want to. There's always a root cause, and there are skills that are missing or lacking. No one has really targeted them before, or they viewed them from just a very different lens. So when kids come to me, honestly, regardless of the age, regardless of the chronological age, I'm looking at where they are in terms of their development, whether it's a 2-year-old coming in or younger school age, even a teen, to see what pieces have they been missing so far. And that's the reason that they're continuing to struggle, especially when it comes to areas of regulation. And we need that in order to be able to have a conversation like you and I are having, to socialize with others, to be okay with change. And that's sometimes such a hard area for kids with autism and ADHD. It's the idea that something is changing and they don't know what to do with the new thing that's coming.
And so what kind of tools do you give the students to help them with the change?
So it all starts with, a lot of it is going to be, it depends because it's so individualized, and yet the methodology stays the same, right? So it depends on how much language the child is coming in with, what their comprehension is like. And it's really an ongoing type of very dynamic assessment, not that I'm sitting somebody down and testing them, unless that's something that's requested. It's a very flowing type of experience where I'm looking at, first and foremost, can they solve a problem that I'm putting in front of them? And the problem is play related, whether it's, do they know why this larger piece doesn't fit into this little house that they build? Do they have that concept of what else can I do because this piece doesn't fit? Or if they're older and we're starting with a board game, board games are a great executive functioning skills learning activity because of the way that they're designed and looking at the reason that they're making certain moves. Yes, sometimes it's luck, and then it becomes more strategic. So do they have a plan? Do they know what the strategy is? And oftentimes when I first see kids, let's say if they're older, and I ask them, well, how did you figure out to move one piece instead of the other? And the answer is usually, I don't know. That's just what I pick. So we want to work with that I don't know, because in reality, they really don't know. No one has asked them, how is it that you learn? Tell me what works for you. Tell me what doesn't work for you. And those are conversations that you can have with older kids. With the younger ones, it's really a lot of work and brain power is on me to dig into their learning styles, figure it out for them, and then show them what I've figured out.
And what do you consider older and younger? Excuse me.
So when I say older, I mean more like preteens going into teens.
Oh, a lot older. Okay.
Older, yeah. Well, and younger, yes, we could divide younger up into, toddlers, we could do preschool, and that in the midst of it all is the school age population, where now we're doing literacy and executive functioning skills. I'm sure you know are tied into literacy in every way, especially when it comes to reading and writing. It's when you're missing those skills, it's so challenging to look at a blank piece of paper and figure out how to get started on a paragraph.
Now, can you talk more about that? Because executive functioning skills are becoming more commonly talked about these days, but I think a lot of parents still don't understand what executive functioning skills are and how they correlate to academics.
Definitely. So one of the skills is impulse control. And it's exactly what it sounds like, being able to control your impulses and actions and reactions. Another one is your working memory. So being able to take in all of the information that you're getting. And there's so much information that kids are getting bombarded with on a daily basis, figuring out very, very quickly and very efficiently what's important, what's not important, and then be able to manipulate all of that information and give an answer. Like, that's a lot of work when you don't have the tools to figure out what to do. And then with those skills tied together, the impulse control and the working memory, comes cognitive flexibility. And that's also being able to look at a situation and figure it out from multiple perspectives. So perspective taking is also something that I've seen written as goals on, education plans. And I'm looking at this goal and I'm looking at the child, there's no way they could reach it. They don't have all of the other skills that need to come before. Like, they don't know how they're viewing a situation. How do you expect them to view it from somebody else's point of view when no one has said, oh, like, this makes sense to me also, the way that you're rationalizing it. It's most of the time it's, well, this is what you're thinking of. Now let's really quickly figure out what somebody else would say, instead of really exploring what's the reason for their thought process, or like, walk me through this. Let me know what's happening here. And again, like the language that I wouldn't talk this way to a 2-year-old, the language is very different. It really depends on like what the child's coming in with in terms of skills, and then looking at where the areas of weaknesses are and letting the parent know these are the strengths. Let's start here and let's use the strengths to then build up the other skills that are a little bit behind, instead of saying we're gonna fix it all, because there's no such thing, right? Like, I'm not in the business of fixing. Kids are not broken. we're exploring, and where every child has a set of strengths. We just have to look sometimes to find them, and then grab onto them and show every single kid what they're really good at, because then they want to do more of that, right? Who doesn't want to feel good about like performing, or just like knowing what it is that they're able to do, right? So instead of focusing on all of these negative areas where a parent gets a list of, these are all the things that your child can't do. That's really overwhelming. And imagine being that child, regardless of the age, and constantly hearing like, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. Or like, this isn't right. It should be this way. And then, the child leaves school and goes, well, if I can't do anything right, I might as well not.
Right.
It's such like a thinking feeling.
So how does the average student learn executive functioning skills usually?
So it's a really interesting question. And, first, like, what is average, right? But these are skills that develop in very natural based environments, and you don't see them because they allow kids to do what it is they do on a regular basis. They allow them to, solve conflicts between their peers. They allow them to attend in a classroom. That's a really big thing that comes up often, where they're not paying attention or they can't focus. My favorite is they're not listening. And I go, well, actually, they don't know what to listen to because there's so much coming in that you saying they're not listening is really tied to they have no idea what you're talking about. And if it's like they're listening to something in a different language, and then they tune out because it's too much effort to figure out what information is coming in, it's easier to say, I need my resources for later. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to pretend that like all of this makes sense, because it's easier to just nod my head and go, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then maybe they'll leave me alone. So I don't actually have to do what's being asked of me. And it's something that comes up really often.
I love your analogy of the foreign language, because I can 100% relate, because I speak some Spanish, but when my husband and his father are in a conversation, I tune out. And my husband is like expecting me to chime in. And I'm like, I stopped listening 5 minutes ago.
Yes, that's exactly it. So you stop listening because it's too much. At the end of the day, it's just too much. And I talk about effort often. It's too much effort to stay there tuned in, trying to not only process what's being said, but then also come up with something to add of your own.
Right. Absolutely.
It's much simpler to go, let me sit back and just observe this happening. Or in my mind, let me just go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Let me go like run down the list of things I need to do later. Like, let me imagine that I'm on the playground, right? That deserves my attention more than whatever is going on here right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a great analogy. So, we didn't really get too much into how you help people with the executive functioning.
Yes. So I'm going to walk you through. It's a great scenario, and I'm so glad we're talking about this today, because I screened a little girl this morning for the parent reached out to me seeking help for comprehension. She really felt like this little girl's almost 5, and she felt like her expressive language skills were better, or I don't want to say better, they were a little bit more advanced, or just farther down the line than her comprehension. There was difficulties with directions, other areas of concern. So what I saw when she came in was that, like, you really have to listen carefully to what kids are saying when there are language difficulties. So yes, it sounds like she's saying a lot. And then when you listen to the actual sentences, they're all the same structure. So it's like, it's not really her spontaneous communication. It's something that she's learned, that she's memorized, and now she's using it, and yet, like, she doesn't really know how to build on it, right? So when we build on information, those are aspects of executive function skills. We have to know where we are and where we want to go. It's like this whole planning and organizing process. So I took out Legos for her, and I like doing things that are like a blank canvas to see what kids can come up with on their own. And the key point here is, when you're looking at executive function challenge, is, does the child know how to get started and what to do? So she opened the box of Legos, she took them out, and then she sat, like, didn't quite know how to get started and where to go. So slowly I showed her that one of them has a door and it opens, and we go, oh, it's like a house. And we started building a house. And as soon as we started, the idea stopped because she didn't know how to proceed. And that's another part of executive function skills, with the planning, the organization, knowing how to, like, foresee almost into the future, where she would have to have in her mind a picture of a house, okay, and then know, what do I do with these blocks to then make parts of this house? So what happens with a difficulty of skill is that we're also lacking narration, right? She didn't really know how to talk about her play experience. So when it comes to the narration of the play itself, what it should look like is that it's a logical sequence of events, right? And that's something that language allows us to do, something that executive function skills allow us to do, to be able to hold on to information, figure out what parts are important, and then lay out this play scene of, here's a house, we built it, the people are going to come visit, okay? We're going to check to see who's home, maybe we'll make breakfast. All of that is expected in areas of development. And that's something that this little girl was lacking. So what she did show was that she had pieces of ideas, and that's the way that I described it. And mom was there and she watched, and she really got it. She goes, oh my gosh, you're right. We see her play and we're already assuming that, well, she's playing, that's what it's supposed to look like. We're not really listening to how her play is sequenced, because it isn't. It's like pockets of information. And that's how she's learned. A little piece here, a little piece there, a little piece somewhere else. And the difficulty is with integration. So with executive function skills, they're all integrated. And that's what allows kids to do well. When the skills are not integrated, that's where you see challenges. And again, it all depends on where the challenges are. Sometimes for kids with language and learning difficulties, those challenges are rooted in language, okay? Still comes back to components of executive functioning. For kids who I see with autism and ADHD, a lot of it is emotional regulation, okay? Where parents come in and it's, everything is a behavior. And I go, oh, it's regulation. Like, they're at all of these, they're pushing, they're kicking, they're spinning. I go, oh, so you mean they're like really in distress? Let's help the distress. So then we can help with everything else. Okay? And it really just so important for all areas of life. Right? So if we go back to the example from this morning, the question is, like, where do we go from here? Like, how do we even help this little girl who in the fall is supposed to go to kindergarten? right? Well, we start with the basics of what's missing. We start with the problem solving piece. We start with figuring out, like, if we have an idea of building a house, what does that even take? That's the thought process. And what's great is that these skills can be built and worked on, where if the next time that we have Lego pieces, I'm going to do most of the setup for her. So I'm going to give her more support. I wanted to see what she was able to come up with, because it's an eval,
Right.
just to figure out like where she is and what I need her to help her with. And it's the same question that mom asked me, well, where do we go from here? And I said, we're going to have to be doing a lot of the work. We're going to have to be processing the information for her, figuring out what's missing, and then just like giving it to her with support, where it's going to look like, oh, the idea is to build a house. Let's get started. Here's a door, here's a window, put it, and like really guiding her through the entire process, because then she's going to be able to see the process in action. And slowly, very slowly, we then pull back the support. And in play, what's so great, and the reason that all my work is through play, is that you can challenge like every child just a little bit, depending on if they have the skills to accept that challenge, right? With older kids, I also let them know, again, like, depending on how much language they have, well, you're right, this is a challenge for today. Like, and some of them who've been with me for a while will say, this looks really hard. I don't know, like, if I can take this on. Or if we're figuring out a new board game, the comments that come in are, this is getting harder. I don't know, like, maybe we should stop. and instead of, right, let's say maybe 6 months ago, if something got hard, the pieces would go flying everywhere, right? Like, that's executive functioning skills at work. And they're working because we were able to work through the pieces flying everywhere and things getting ripped, and other parts just like not working, and it really feeling like this is the end of the world, even though we know it's not. We can't tell a child that it's not a big deal, because to them in that moment, it's a big deal. So if it feels like the end of the world, we go, you're right, it probably is. To you in this moment, it's the end. It's an impossible task. Yeah, it's an impossible task. And then we give support instead of downplaying it, right? So it's like a great scenario if you were to come to me and let me know that like something isn't working, you were trying to figure out a program, and you spent hours on it and it's still not working, you're so frustrated, and I go, oh, it's not a big deal, don't worry about it. I just completely invalidated your entire experience. And not only does it make you feel poorly about yourself, like some kids go into full on shutdown mode, and others will react, and they're reacting because they're feeling invalidated. And oftentimes that's what we see, instead of letting them know, like, that must be so hard. I can't imagine you worked for hours. Like, what a different tone. And it's really more inviting for you to go, I did, and it's still not working. And then I tell you, yeah, it's still not working. I mean, that must be like, what a struggle. And you're like, oh my gosh, you get me. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. I've been struggling. Okay. Very different type of interaction than, oh, don't worry about it. Like, just shrug it off.
And we do that as adults most of the time with poor kids, is invalidating.
Yes, we do. Absolutely.
Do you know what the percentage of autistic children or individuals that are able to get help with their executive functioning skills like you're talking about?
It's a really great question. I don't necessarily know the percentage. And here's the unfortunate part. I don't know if people really like focus on these skills, you're right in terms of like now it's like a hot topic and there it's been talked about more. It's still, I don't feel like it's enough yet because there are so many levels and so many intricacies. And even before we get to the higher levels, higher levels of learning, like, we could talk about like metacognition and thinking about your own thought process and then what's that like. Even before we get to that, we still always have to go back to the basics and figure out like, is this child regulated, right? You talked about like autistic kids. All roads lead back to regulation. Same thing with ADHD kids, right? And I've had here kids in my office like climbing up furniture and we go, okay, something's going on. Like, let's really figure out how to help and support instead of constantly letting them know that something's not allowed, right? Like, can you imagine how many times during the day kids, like autistic kids, ADHD kids, constantly hear, no, don't do that. Don't do that. That's not allowed. Come back to your seat. Come sit down.
Well,
We can't do that right now.
I've heard so many stories from parents of kids with severe autism who their teacher doesn't know how to control them, so they just lock them in a closet all day during the school day.
That's like, wow.
Yeah.
And the key word, right?
I'm sure you've heard it too.
Well, the key word that you said is control. Like, we're not, like, there's no, and people talk about, well, you have to control your emotions. I was like, no, you need to like regulate them. Adults can't do that all the time. You're expecting, a 3, 4, 5-year-old to the whole day. How? It's an impossible ask. And it goes back to when we have these kind of impossible asks of kids, we're setting them up to fail every single day. And when kids are failing and they feel like failing every single day, they don't feel like they know how to be a child. So like, imagine that, failing at 5, like, and feeling that way and talking about it in that way, like, I can't do this. I don't have friends. I don't know what's going on. Like, my brain just told me to do it. I don't know why I pushed that person. Again, with kids who have like language in the way where they're like really able to tell you what's going on. The ones who can't, they show you. They still tell you, just in different ways. They'll show you that they can't handle something by like pushing it over to the side or like really not being able to do what you're asking them to do, not because they don't want to, because in that moment they can't. And the ask then is too big. So it's not up to the child to, and I've heard this before, they need to learn how to sit. Like, hold on. Hold on. Who are we training here? They need to learn how to sit. No, let's figure out like what they need in order to like learn best. And it's really up to the adult to go, what can I change in my approach so that the child then is eventually learning? Because learning how to sit is not a skill. Not teaching kids to learn how to sit.
Yeah, my oldest child, 29 years later, is on the spectrum. They used to always like to sit on their knees in school. And sometimes they had teachers that were totally fine with it. And other times he had teachers who insisted that he had to sit on his butt. How was it bothering anyone just by him sitting on his knees in the chair? And that's such a minor thing, let alone someone who can't sit still, like how I was as a kid.
Right. And such a great, I'll give another like really great example when it comes to autism and the regulation component. So I was on a call with a school and all of these team members were talking about like one little 4-year-old. And whenever the meeting opened up and it was just like all of these, he can't, he doesn't, he's aggressive, like this whole list of negative feedback, and the parents are on the call. And I'm thinking, like, imagine being the parent and receiving this type of input as soon as the call opens. So the school started and I go, okay, what does he do really well? And there was like this pause of they never thought about it in that way. And then I said, well, that's the problem. And I was very open and honest. And I go, the mindset here, that's the problem. The fact that you're looking at this 4-year-old and in your mind, it doesn't matter if you're not saying it out loud to him. You're thinking that way about him, and he's going to continue to show up for you in that way. The exact way that you expect him to show up, that's how he's going to show up. Right? So it was such an interesting conversation because we were talking about when he gets dysregulated, and he can become dysregulated really quickly because he doesn't have the skills, going back to skills yet, to remain regulated when he's in distress. Let's say like he'll throw something, or one of the teachers said, well, he was crying and I was talking to him, and I'm already going, ooh, what's going to happen next? Because he's upset and you're trying to rationalize from your adult mind and like talk him through something he shouldn't be doing. Goes, and then he like tried to swat at my face. And I said, of course, he wanted you to stop talking. And there was silence. I go, what did you think he was going to do? You kept talking on and on. He already can't handle the environment he's in. You're still bombarding him with language and with trying to rationalize something. You're not stopping. Of course he swatted at you. I would do the same thing. So it's that piece. It's that like lack of recognition of what does this little body and this nervous system need in the moment in order to figure out like what the environment is asking, or just know that I can't be here right now. And I'm showing you that I can't handle this. And so it's not about teaching kids like, well, you have to teach him self-control. I go, oh, okay, how about we work on regulation and I help you learn how to regulate with him together. Like now that I can do. The other part, you've come to the wrong place. Like that's not, control isn't something that we teach. It's regulation. Because then what it looks like is the ability to have that kind of control. And it's being able to have control of your body, right? And of your words too. And think about when we are in distress, we say things that later on we're like, oh, I should not have said that. That's also impulse control. Okay? Or we yell and we curse at others. A lot of it happens on the road. It's a great example of being able to control your impulses when you're stuck in traffic or if somebody cuts you off. Right? If you've had an easy breezy kind of day, you go, oh, all right, like you could go in front of me. It doesn't matter. Okay, another 20 minutes. Okay, because you have enough resources and enough capacity to sit through traffic. On other days, when you're fully depleted, right, like a battery gets drained, somebody cuts you off and you're alone in your car and you're yelling at the person who can't hear you. Okay, because you can't handle it that day. You can't handle it in that moment. And we're talking about adults. Right. So what about expectations for kids, for like autistic kids, for ADHD kids who don't have the skills yet? And again, like we're all wired differently anyway, right? So how is it that we have the same exact expectations for everyone? And that expectation gap is so wide. And if we lower them and like when we can, like really meet kids where they are, they're going to show us how successful they can be. And then they're going to want to be more successful, not because we told them that we're rewarding them with something, but because that motivation is now internal. It's like a feel good of, oh my gosh, I accomplished this today. It's like when we have a to-do list and we check every box and we're like, wow, where's my gold star? Right? It's here. It's all internal. That's how I work, at least like here in my practice.
Well, that's amazing. And so I know when we talked before, you said with younger students, you you only meet them in person. Do you meet older students online, or is that also only done in person?
It's a little bit of both. Depends on where they live. So some of them prefer virtual because it cuts down on travel, and others prefer coming in person.
So if I knew a first grader who could really benefit from your program in California, would you be able to help them?
I'd be able to definitely guide we'll have to see in terms of parents and, I'm always open to like have a conversation. It would be more in the realm of like a parent coaching piece, which is also part of what I do, because without that, like, how are we supposed to take therapy from the therapy room into the outside world, right? For most parents are in the therapy room with me. I would say like maybe except for the teens, because they don't want to.
Right.
they don't
Yeah.
want they don't want their parents anywhere near them.
And do you coach teachers as well?
I do. There's professional development that I do. Schools have also reached out to see if I can help them with their professional development, especially like in the realms of executive functioning, because it's really about understanding that it's tied into every single aspect of what goes on in a school day. Right? And it's really beneficial for neurodiverse kids and for neurotypical kids also. Right? It's because when we like adjust in the way that like we look at a child, you could do that for everybody. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm asking you to change your entire curriculum. I'm not asking you to change anything, just your perspective. That's what I'm asking you to change.
Well, that sounds easy enough. I mean, of course, it takes work.
It does. It's fun, right? You're like, oh, it sounds easy enough. You have to be open to it.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be open to say, I really don't know what that means. And I've honestly only had that happen once, when I was talking to a teacher and I said, it sounds like he's dysregulated. And she goes, I don't know what that means. Can you tell me like what that means? That I would rather that. Like, what an open and honest way for an educator to say, I don't know what that means. Right? Instead of the feedback, well, we're doing the same thing you are. I go, oh, great. How is it working for you? If we're doing the same exact thing. I go, that's so interesting. Share with me, like, how is that same thing working for you? I know in my mind it's not the same thing, right? But it's as long as you're open to going, we've been doing things the same way and something isn't working. I'm guessing it's not this 4-year-old. It must be us. We are doing something that isn't working, because it's been a few months already and it's the same thing and it's still not working. Right? So like, that's really the biggest shift, is as soon as you really recognize that you need more knowledge and you need more training and just an opportunity to learn something different. Right? This is not new stuff. It's been around. Like I talk about, like, play isn't a new thing. We've had plays, like, it's not new at all. It's just, I don't know where it went.
Well, because we're so focused on the kids passing the state tests that there's no time for play in school anymore. And in the house, everyone's so busy trying to get from here to there, or the electronics. I mean, all of those things are taking away from play in the home.
Yep. We could talk about this for another hour. Like, where is the play? Where did it go? Because all of these skills that we're talking about, that's how they're formed, through these type of play experiences. And you just have to be skilled enough to see the gaps and to really help each child and each family really as a unit, to then show them like what these skills look like when they're breaking down and what they look like when we build them back up.
Well, this has been amazing. I actually, I would like to hire you to do my next tutor training with my staff if we
Great.
can talk about it later. But I think it'll be great to help them to know how to help their students when they're tutoring, if a student's having a meltdown or what to do. So I definitely would like to have you to do their training session next quarter.
Sounds great.
So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The best way is through my website, which I'm sure you'll link. It's
Well,
www.playtolearnconsulting.com. And I'm on Instagram at Play to Learn Consulting, same thing on Facebook.
awesome. Yeah, because if people are listening to it on the podcast, they may not see it. So that way they can hear
Yes.
it. And wonderful. Thank you so much, Polina, for all of your insight and expertise on how to help kids get back to play.
Yes, exactly.